Hello and welcome back to Redirected. My name is Andrew East, and this is a show where we sit down with celebrities, athletes, entrepreneurs, really anybody who has experienced a pivot or change in life. I think we all go through them, so I wanted to sit down with people who have gone through these transitions well, I call them redirections, to hear some entertaining stories and also glean some wisdom along the way. So today's guest is Desh Amila. He is a documentary filmmaker and serial entrepreneur. He is currently the founder and CEO at This Is 42 and is working on his second feature film, which is called Better Left Unsaid. He raised $50,000 for the project and just recently announced the documentary to the public. So 2018 was his first full-length feature film. It was called Islam, the Future of Tolerance, and it featured characters such as Sam Harris, Majid Nawaz, and became the #1 iTunes download worldwide in the documentary category. Desh and I talked about a wide range of things, including his film. It's interesting. It seems like he has a knack for engaging in particularly contentious conversation. So I asked him about that and what is his motivation behind that. He also has a really interesting upbringing, just with where he was raised and also his religious path. So he was raised in Sri Lanka. He was Buddhist. He was a fundamentalist. And then he went to born again Christian. Now he's an atheist. We talk about how that has affected his journey as well. So anyway, it was a really interesting conversation. I hope you enjoy it. And before we jump into it, please subscribe to the show and give it a rating on whatever platform you're listening on. Without further ado, I bring you Desh Amila. Desh, pleasure to meet you. I appreciate you joining me. I know you're on the other side of the world here, so I believe it's early there where you are.
Well, thank you for having me. It is 6:20 a.m. or in the future, Saturday. You're recording this on a Friday. Your
Yes,
end.
that is
I will
correct.
be waking up the whole family in a bit.
Nice. Listen, it seems like you have a bit of a desire for, maybe we should call it self-imposed suffering with some of the topics that you pursue to discuss. Between I know you have two documentaries. One's about to be released. The other is already released. One is titled Islam, the Future of Tolerance. And then the other is called Better Left Unsaid. Fill us in on what those are about.
Well, Islam and the Future of Tolerance came out at a time where particular conversations about Islam as an ideology was a very, very taboo subject. Conversation about it resulted in really death for some people. But there was a very important conversation that needed to be had. And one side of the political aisle was having this conversation as the whole world's problems was because of this one group of people and this ideology, while the other side of the political aisle just did not want to talk about it because they thought this might hurt a minority group. Again, it came from both sides, whether it's right or wrong, came from a place that they thought was right. And I'm here thinking both sides are getting this wrong, and it was too important. It is too important that this conversation needed to elevate. So I made a film about Islam as an ideology, not Muslims as a group of people, but Islam as an ideology. And I had the perfect two people to present this conversation, because there was an extraordinary over 4-year conversation between two people. Their ideologies completely differ at the beginning, and they came to some form of an understanding and then continued that conversation. And that was Sam Harris and Majid Nawaz. Sam Harris, famous atheist, Majid Nawaz, ex-Islamist extremist who went to jail for his activity. So I had the opportunity to tell the story I wanted to tell, being intellectually honest, through a movie called Islam and the Future of Tolerance. So that was the first foray.
Well, so we'll pause there if you don't mind. I know you have a journey of your religion that's quite unique, and I know you were born in a Buddhist family, joined a fundamentalist church, which was of what religion?
Well, here's the thing. I believe, some people will find it problematic. The term, it was a fundamentalist church. Again, because some elements of this way of thinking has been really well branded as it's a progressive way of thinking. But ultimately, your characterization is right. So I was part of a born-again Christian movement, which primarily reads the Bible through, one, a literal sense, two, although it's contradictory to what I just said, but also looks at through what they call the prosperity gospel. In other words, that God wants you to be rich in a way. So so those pastors you may have heard, who owns multiple jets and things like that, and they justify it by saying that's what God wants. So yeah, I did that too. Yes, you've looked into it.
And now you're a self-proclaimed atheist. Is that correct?
Yes, I am, and I've been at it for a little while.
So that's quite the spectrum of experiences there.
Yes. So I think there was for me, due to personal circumstances, I came to this country with relative comfort with regards to my religious positioning, because for 19 years of my life I was in a Buddhist majority country, born into a Buddhist family.
That being Sri Lanka.
That being Sri Lanka, that's right.
Yes.
And it's such a norm. I didn't think too much of anything, but I got into a relationship with somebody who ended that relationship quoting Corinthians. I think it's 13:12, thou shalt not be unequally yoked. What that simply meant was she couldn't be with somebody who was not from the same religion, which led me onto quite a journey trying to find that particular religion as part of my identity. And yeah, so I mean, that didn't end up that well. It was quite, I had to do some mental gymnastics to make it work, because my brain, just reason and rationality was part, even at that point, my brain was just trying to comprehend, this just contradicts everything, how you understand the world and how you see the world. So yeah, I mean, that journey did lead me to also try to understand other religions. I mean, I read the Quran and some hadiths, because I did for a short time consider maybe that is the path. I read the Mormon Bible. I read some of the Bhagavad Gita, and I ordered tons of books from Sri Lanka about Buddhism to see, was that the case? Then I discovered philosophy, and started reading Stoicism, and so old philosophies to modern philosophies, and eventually came out of all of that entire journey, which lasted about 3-4 years as an atheist.
Have you read A Guide to the Good Life regarding Stoicism?
Good life. No, I have not.
Well, so it's an interesting take on Stoicism. I'd never actually kind of looked under the hood and examined that philosophy, but is there a world that exists where, partaking in a certain school of philosophical thought goes hand in hand with religious belief? Or do you think they're mutually exclusive?
I think it is. It's not necessarily mutually exclusive. At the beginning of this sort of journey, when you make that shift, you kind of get quite hung up on what you've just learned. At the beginning of my atheism, I would consider myself was a little militant about what I've just learned. So I was arguing people, like when people stop me at the street to talk, preach the gospel, because I've read the Bible and I can quote things, I would have these great arguments. But over time I've mellowed a little. So I interact with a lot of people who have religious beliefs and
Mm-hmm.
have a certain kind of understanding. So to your point, I think you know, the nowadays when we go down this path, I normally say, I believe in Spinoza's God, which is, if you're familiar, if you're not familiar, Spinoza was this extraordinary philosopher, ancient philosopher, who sort of made this comment. Einstein even said the same thing. It is the idea of God is not ascribed to a thing rather than it is the universe itself. That is my simplest way of putting it. So, and I realize majority of religious people, although they are part of a religion, if you have that deeper philosophical conversation, what they really believe in is a version of that. They have different names, sometimes they have rituals. Most of them ascribe the same qualities. They just label it differently. So
Yeah.
if that is the case, and if they lead a life based on that, not imposing on other people's and other people's ways of life, I really don't find that to be largely problematic.
So I went on my own spiritual journey, you could say. I played professional football here in the United States, and the first team I signed with was the Kansas City Chiefs, and a lot of their coaches there are Mormon, and I'd never really had extensive conversations with someone who has different religious beliefs. Like, I'd obviously had conversations, but I never really understood what are the mechanics that make your religion different than mine. And it was so interesting to me to hear the Mormons' belief, where they essentially have a part 3 to the Holy Gospels, and I believed in part 1 and 2. And I would look at what the Mormons believed and be like, oh, how wild that you would just add this third book, right? But then I realized that, oh wow, well the Jewish people look at Christians like that oh, we just added this random second book. And then it set me on this, I read a bunch of kind of Christian cult books, one by Lauren Drain, where she was a part of Westboro Baptist Church, and then her experience leaving that, and kind of left me with a more introspective approach to religion. But ultimately, I am a big fan of Sam Harris as well, listen to his podcast, but I have realized that at some point, I think you ultimately choose a truth. At some point, I feel like you are left with the choice of which is truth. And maybe I haven't gone deep enough to have that challenge, but I am still a Christian while enjoying the philosophical journey as well. Anyway, to tie it back into the film, which I do want to do, I appreciate you entertaining that tangent. What was the ultimate conclusion of the film, without spoiling all the goodies, but how can we view Islam as an ideology in a healthy way?
Well, first and foremost, one has to respect that as an ideology, it is complex and it has different variations. In the West, there is a tendency to, when one says Islam, consider it as this one thing. Now, nowadays, people know, okay, there's Sunni, Shias, there's something like that, and then but it's a very simplistic view. Just like Christianity and Catholicism have these multiple layers within different denominations. Within Islam, that exists. Within Islam, there are these multiple layers, and the movie goes through simple ways of explaining each of these layers. It's part of a conversation, so it's not like it's been preached at you. It's not a lecture that you're going to watch. And how each of these impact the way of life globally. And each of these layers there are certain connections, but some of them are so different. It's almost like well, this part is an entirely different religion versus this part. So we use concentric circles to explain, and it's littered throughout the movie. What I take great pride in, and this all credit needs to go to Majid Nawaz and Sam Harris, is we strongly influence global language about this particular subject matter through the movie. The movie was before it was a movie, it was a book, but we popularized it, and now I hear some of the language in the movie people using in interviews. Occasionally politicians use some of the words that we introduced. And in Australia, there's this pivotal moment that I knew that we've had an impact is similar to NFL. We have AFL here, Aussie rules. Quite a prominent footballer went on a popular radio show, and they were talking about something quite random, and he brought up this particular subject matter on a very popular show, and he used the word Islamism, and we realized that he must have seen the movie, and now all of a sudden he has a language. And that's actually what we wanted to get, because we wanted people to get the language and context, so next time when there's a conversation, a simple thing as, I've heard so often people use language like they're talking about Islam, the ideology, but they're saying the word Muslims, right? So they're using the people to argue a point about ideology. So there are even a little difference like that presented in context really has a shift of how you think about that particular subject matter. So that was our aim. By the way, the movie came out last year. And anyone who's listening to this, if you have an hour and a half, it's on Amazon Prime. If you have a Prime account, it's free. Please watch it.
Yeah, we will link that down below. It is on Amazon, and we'll provide that link. But Sam Harris interviewed, I can't remember his name, but this guy talked about how every genetic quality is on a spectrum, right? So like your ability to be social, your whatever, fast twitch muscle fibers, everything is on this range. Is it fair to view kind of Islam and really all religions as like, okay, look, you can't just group them into one, you can't just group people into one class that has this hugely wide spectrum, right? From one into another, you said it's almost like a different religion-ish. Is that
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's an apt description. Just to put it in perspective, you have a very aggressive version of the ideology, Wahhabism, that it really existed only in one place. Then you have a more of a modernized version of the religion, like the Bori culture, which exists way outside of it. And the difference is, I can describe in one way, which is you look at Wahhabism, which means you will see the females in that culture, even from a very young age, fully covered. You're looking through the mesh almost. And then you have the other end, where the culture wouldn't mind if if their females don't cover. Education is very important in those cultures. So if you look at those two, one end is prosecuted by the other end, if it's within the same boundaries of a country. So you'll be like, okay, how is that the same religion? But it is.
Was it born from your experience making this film that you ultimately came up with the Better Left Unsaid idea for a film?
Yeah, so I have been looking for my follow-up to Islam and the Future of Tolerance for a little while. And last 4 years, it's been quite a challenging place to be in if you're in politics or if you're even remotely interested. And this is before COVID. So politics has been something that I've been interested in. And I got a cold email from a first-time filmmaker who was a fan of my first film saying, "Hey, I'm making this political documentary, but I need help. I don't know how to sort of finish it and get it out there." And I get a few messages like that quite often, but I always give people time. So when I saw the concept, I gave some free advice, and I kept doing that for a little while, and then eventually I got a really rough assemble of what could be a movie. And I'll be honest, I didn't have much faith in what I was getting, but as I started watching it, I realized this has amazing potential. So, and it clicked in my head, this is the perfect movie to follow up from my last, and that's why I picked it. So Kurt Jamungal, the writer director of this film, is who I'm talking about.
And so one of the taglines of the movie, I believe, is "When does the left go too far?" I watched a good bit of it, and I would love for you to kind of just explore what the film undertakes and what's discussed.
Absolutely. Now, I want to preface this by saying quite simply this: I consider myself a liberal, a small L liberal. I see the important value of Enlightenment values that fundamentally built the West as we know it right now. So I am approaching this as somebody who has center-left political ideology. The problem we want to address is rather simple in a way. See, if you were to ask somebody who has far-right political ideology, what do they want? Well, their position hasn't changed for 100 years plus, right? What they want, whatever they ultimately lay out, the primary premise is the same. There is ethnic superiority, and everything, all the policies, it's based on that. Now, if you ask the same question from the furthest of the left, the far left, it's not that simple an answer, and I've started noticing, especially in the last year and a half or so, that some far-right ideologies are making its way to the mainstream, and politicians are spouting it like it is important policy one should consider. And I realize people don't know what these policies and what these ideologies really mean. So I wanted to explore that in a way that going to be uncomfortable to some of my peers. It made me uncomfortable, but I do believe in having the ability to question one's own beliefs, ability to clean up your own house to a certain degree. So the film is a political thesis on political extremism, starting from the far right ideologies. It does go into the far left ideologies to start off with, and then it goes into the far right ideologies. It looks at the origins of where these ideas come from the philosophical underpinnings and historical outcomes of application of these ideologies, and then eventually it tries to present a way of thinking that could potentially lead to an answer. And you, again, just like Islam and the Future of Tolerance, the idea is not necessarily to tell you, here's what you need to do to get out of this mess. It's rather giving you the language, giving you pause to think about what is happening, and then have conversations, better conversations.
So is the goal to come up with that answer, or to increase, the quality of conversations and teamwork per se?
Bit of both.
Yeah.
Bit of both. This movie is a little bit different to my last movie in the sense I didn't direct it. And I say this with utmost love to Kurt. I actually disagree about certain bits in this movie. So there's actually going to be two versions. There's a director's cut that's about 2 hours long, and there's another cut, which is the public version, which is 90 minutes. I think you may have seen it. And that is because we have certain points of difference. And I agree about 80% of what we are talking about, but that 80% is important enough for me to put my name on it and put it out there. The way I tell people, I'm more of a student of the Sam Harris school of thinking, and Kurt is more of a Petersonian, Jordan Peterson school of thinking. So that's why the ending may not satisfy some people, but that's okay. Still worthwhile your time.
When can we expect the release of that?
So, taking from what I learned last time around releasing a movie, this time we are attempting to self-distribute. So we are right now at the hands of the gods at Amazon, iTunes, and Google. So the film is being submitted. We're waiting for them to tell us, but we are hoping March this year we can have the movie out. Awesome. And as soon as it's out, I will let you know. I hope your audience will be curious enough to consider it.
I would love to kind of follow up the exploration that you did. First of all, with the question of, is the political climate... Listen, we live in the United States, just had the election recently, and it seems like, oh my gosh, nobody's having a conversation. It's like, it's this wild tribalism of, oh my gosh, you believe that? Well, I don't want anything to do with you. Is that how extreme it is globally? I think you have a little better insight than I might in that sense.
Well, I must admit, what is happening in America is somewhat unique to America. There are a couple of other places in the West that it is as polarized, but overall, I think I'm sitting here in, or rather standing here in Australia, and we have a political system. By the virtue of how the system works, we are not as polarized as America. For example, we have rank voting, and our elections run for a measly 30 days, and the campaigns, everything is done. So people don't really have the time to be captured by the political rhetoric for years to come. In America, I think years of social inequality and extraordinary shaping of the minds by mainstream media outlets, compounded by the true potential in the negative of social media, has created just a hotbed of anguish and frustration among American public that is unprecedented. I don't think I have witnessed anything like that. And so from a global perspective, it feels uniquely American right now. So I think in a way,
well, that's good news. Yeah, great. It's just us. It's our problem. I love that.
But I do want to mention one thing though. There is a global resurgence in far right way of thinking. Populism is has made a surprising comeback. You have your Duterte of Philippines, and certain leaders in Europe, in Brazil. There is what you got to understand. Although it is an internal problem or an internal strife within America, America has the world's largest megaphone. So because of your reach of your media, it does export to the rest of the world. And this is why I'm very much interested in American politics, because of the flow-on effect. So your problem has become the world's problem.
Yeah. We're kind of marketing geniuses, which typically doesn't present this type of harm, but in this case, it seems like it might. I like to maybe romanticize humanity and the differing viewpoints and say, you know what, at the end of the day, everybody wants the same thing. They're just going about it in a different way. Whether you're on the far right or far left, the goal is to, advance humanity and to expand everybody's well-being. Is that the case, or am I misled?
Well, this is one of the problems we tackle in this movie. Kurt will fundamentally disagree with that statement. I am sympathetic towards your statement because ultimately, as human beings, we have a collective goodness in us, and we want to achieve that level of our ability to do certain things, and we want to pass it on to a next generation. I believe that we just go about it differently. If you ask somebody with right-wing ideology, on the face of things, they think they are good, the other side is evil. The same view goes to the left. But Kurt comes to a different conclusion. And I don't want to give away too much. I highly recommend you watch the movie. And one thing I want to mention is that we try our best to present evidence throughout the movie. On screen, we show the studies we cite, and where we get to the point we get to, how we get to the point, rather. So again, the reason that I'm happy doing that is it will get you thinking, is it that the far right and the far left want the same thing? Maybe they actually want fundamentally different things. You will be the judge at the end of watching this movie, and it'll give you pause.
So yeah, you encourage thought regardless of where you stand. Okay. Desh, I know you're a filmmaker, but you also have other entrepreneurial ventures. I know you're involved with This Is 42. You could speak about that and maybe some other fun things you have going on.
Absolutely. So right now, This Is 42 is my new venture. It is a media company that is producing tons of content. We obviously made a movie. We have a number of podcasts we are producing, and we are currently engaged in a quite very early stages of a platform we're developing. We should be able to put it out later. Well, actually, hopefully Q2 of 2021. It is difficult to launch something from scratch during a pandemic, but I have this belief that education should be fun. Both my parents are school teachers from Sri Lanka, so education's always been part of my family, but I am hugely inspired by the megaphone of America, Hollywood, and its music and films. And why they reach so far and wide is because they're entertaining. And I am a student of the School of Hip Hop, so nice. I consider what I do is edutainment. It's if you didn't know, now you know. KRS-One's album is the inspiration for that. But anyway, the point I'm trying to make is, what I'm trying to do, whether it's film, whether it's podcast, and this new platform we're coming up with, is all about making education as entertaining as possible without taking away from the intellectual integrity education must have. So I'm working towards a platform. Remember the name, This Is 42. In the next few months, should be able to announce what's coming up. I know I'm dealing in vagaries here, but something exciting is brewing in the background.
Wow, I'm excited. I'll tell you what's exciting is that beard is impressive, Desh. I am 6 weeks unshaven, and this is all I have to show for it. So kudos to you on that.
Thank you. I have a tendency every 4 or so years, I go through a complete transformation of my look.
Great. Well, I'm glad I caught this version. What are your goals now, Desh?
Well, my goal for this year is I've got a number of businesses that I've set up. I want to make sure that I reach the potential. I want to make sure at least 100,000 people watch the movie Better Left Unsaid. I get This Is 42 platform out there this year. A couple of the podcasts I'm producing, I want to continue to reach larger audiences. I think your audience may be interested and may have heard of the young Coleman Hughes, a promising young intellectual from America who is doing amazing things. We had well, this is going to sound awful to some, but we had an amazing 2020. And we've got another podcast coming out this year. So yeah, I have big goals for this year. I feel like 2020, we built a strong foundation. Now it's time to build on it.
When you look back on your life experience to date, growing up in Sri Lanka as a Buddhist, migrating to Australia, all through that, your religious experience, and then also in your career as a filmmaker and then beyond, are there 3 lessons that you've learned or have been shared with you that have resonated well with you and you'd like to share with us?
Sure. The first thing that comes to my mind is around 2010, one of my mentors sat me down and pointed out something. So the first thing is, if you can learn from people who've done it before you, put your pride aside, listen to them, because you need to understand you are standing on the shoulders of giants. We have the entire human history of learning, and some people get to a point of I know it's hubris, thinking that I know everything, I know better than anybody else that came before me. You don't. So first thing, don't shy away from getting advice from people who've done it, and even if they're older, and even if they're not as successful as you think you want them to be, it doesn't really matter. That's one. 2 is for me, and now this is going to come across as I haven't taken this advice, but I promise you I have, which is focus on minimal number of things. If you can, just one thing, put a lot of energy into that one thing, and you may be able to split into different areas. So my example was this particular meeting. This mentor of mine had a whiteboard and told me, okay, Desh, write down every project you're working on. And I wrote down 17 things. 17 projects I was trying to work on, and he asked me to just stare at it for a little while and tell him how am I going to do all of that. And I kind of had answers, but as I was justifying myself, I realized this is not going to work out. There is no possible way that I can do all of these things at the same time. So focusing on a couple of things really will help you. So in 2013 was when I relaunched a company called Thinking, which was a concept I had since 2010. And I was trying to do it in different ways. Thinking ended up becoming Australia's and New Zealand's largest intellectual touring company, because that's the only thing I did. And now I'm doing a few things, but ultimately they're all connected to the same thing. So focus on one thing. That is a big lesson I learned. And the third thing, which somebody who I had a massive disagreement told me, and I consider that an enormous learning, is he really didn't like me, but he said he respect my ability to adapt. So adapting to changing conditions. It is difficult, but because since I was 6 years old, I've been in boarding schools, even when I was in Sri Lanka, and then coming to Australia at a end of my teenage years, having to do everything on my own and all the hurdles I've gone through in my life. What made it work was my ability to adapt. Right now, 2 years ago, I was running events, and now the event industry, this side of the world, has been decimated because of once in a lifetime pandemic. But I have adapted now successfully to do all these other things. This documentary we are talking about was made during a pandemic. This platform that's about to come out was made during a pandemic. And ability to adapt and not being scared when you have to do that, when you're forced to do that, is a very important thing I've learned.
Wow, those are wise words. Desh, I appreciate you giving me time today. Appreciate your experiences and your thoughtfulness. If you want to find out more about Desh as a listener, we will link his information as well as information for some of his projects down below. But it was a pleasure to meet you, and I look forward to what's next, Desh.
Thank you so much, mate. And thank you so much for anyone who decided to listen this far.
Yeah.
I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you got something out of it. Thank you again, mate. I really appreciate it. It was a great conversation.